So we're going to start with a special clip for you, so take a look.
When you're convicted of a crime in this country, your chances of future employment are cut in half. Amir Futrell knows that firsthand.
What did you do to get in trouble?
Controlled substance.
Specifically?
Cocaine.
Cocaine?
Yes, sir.
You got busted for selling?
Yes, sir.
What kind of time did you do?
6 years.
When Futrell got out of prison, he had 2 kids to support and no job prospects.
I didn't want to revert to what brought me into the penitentiary. So, I was looking for a new way. You have to try something different, and this was it.
We strain it and then we jar it.
He found Brenda Palms Barber and her bees. She hires former inmates and turns them into beekeepers.
These are people who had served time for crimes, but could not get back into the labor market because of their backgrounds.
Palms Barber helps them gain work experience so that they can start building a resume.
Oh, you guys have great smiles.
As she builds an unlikely business on the mean streets of Chicago.
There are lots of weeds on the west side, and there are weeds that produce nectar. And in fact, they produce some beautiful, delicious honey as well.
There's a metaphor in there somewhere.
Well, absolutely there is. It isn't about what we see as a flower or a weed. It's just drawing the good out of that plant source and transforming it into something that is sweet and good.
In 2005, Sweet Beginnings began with $140,000 in seed money from the Illinois Department of Corrections. It now sells honey and skincare products under the name of Bee Love in supermarkets, hotels, and airports. The company expects sales of $300,000 this year. But Palms Barber measures success differently. Nationally, 40% of inmates return to prison. Only 4% of her workers do.
It makes me feel great. Makes me feel like a good father, good person.
You give them wings.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. We hope so. And the thing is that they have the wings. They just need that support, so they can take flight.
That's a business model Brenda Palms Barber hopes to pollinate across the country. Don Daler, CBS News, Chicago.
Thank you. So the United States incarcerates more people than any other country in the world. Our American penal system today holds about 2.3 million people who are living behind the wall. And so this essentially means that 1 in 10 Americans are incarcerated, and as I said, living behind bars. And just interestingly enough to compare, China is second with 1.5 million, and Russia is third with 890,000 people. And so what we know for sure is that 90% of those individuals that are incarcerated will be released. They will come back to their communities, and they are amongst us. The community from which I come from is located on the west side of Chicago. And it is a community that has been deeply impacted by very tough economic disinvestment. And roughly, to give you a sense, 57% of the adults in this community have been incarcerated. And so when I relocated from Denver, Colorado, to become the executive director of this nonprofit organization called the North Lawndale Employment Network, I simply thought it was going to be about helping people build skills and connect to good jobs. But what I learned quickly is that it wasn't a community that didn't want to work. It was a community that couldn't get to work simply because of the stigma that is associated with having a criminal background in this country. Some of you may be familiar with Michelle Alexander's book called The New Jim Crow. If you haven't read that, it's a very interesting story. But what we also experience in our community is that nearly 60% of the households operate on less than $25,000 a year. And the unemployment rate in our community is officially about 26%, but unofficially, we think it hovers closer to 35 and maybe as high as 40%. So our vision was to pollinate a model to transform the way that prison reentry happens in this country. And our mission as an organization, as a nonprofit organization at first, was to improve the earnings potential of this community. And we also developed a product mission, which I'll share with you now, but I'll reference it later, which is that we harvest and we actually have our own hives in Chicago on the west side, and we sell our products, and we also sell honey and skincare infused products, and there'll be more about that in a moment. So as I described, who do we serve? And I kind of described the community in which we live in. 46% of the folks that we work with are under 35, 68% men and women. You can see the sort of basic statistics there. So here's where I want to pause and just tell you about what actually really happened to create this business called Sweet Beginnings. I did not know anything about formerly incarcerated men and women, or a term that is becoming more popular, returning citizens, nor did I know anything about working with bees. So how did we get here, right? And honestly, it was because it became clear to me that after developing a job readiness program to address the 57% of the adults in our community that had criminal backgrounds, that there weren't jobs. And I was really quite naive initially. I thought, well, if I just develop a really good job training program that's competitive and that will equip them with the skills that they need, then surely there'll be good jobs for them. Of course, that's not what happened. We developed a job readiness program called U-Turn Permitted. And I love that, because I believe that U-turns ought to be permitted. Actually, when I'm driving, I wish there were more signs that said U-turn permitted. But what happened is we developed this job training program, and we had hundreds and hundreds of folks that showed up. And they were like, this is great, but then at the end of the day, the jobs weren't there. So, out of I was exacerbated, I was mostly frustrated, because I could see in the eyes of these men and women who had trusted our job training program as a nonprofit that we would be able to help them secure employment. And when you have done bad things, and you have served your time for the crime, and you're sick and tired of the old way of life, and you want to have a new life, which includes employment, you're incredibly discouraged because the opportunities are so limited. And if anything, you sort of fall back on what got you in trouble to begin with. 3/4 of the crimes that are committed in our country are nonviolent offenses. Most of the time, they're drug-related offenses. And so it was clear that we had to prove in some way that these men and women could work and be of value, because none of the employers in our neighborhood were open to hiring any of these folks. And so it dawned on me, and I wish I could say it was just, well, woo, happy, I'm going to start a business. But it was honestly out of sheer frustration and not knowing what else to do that I decided I needed to become their first employer. That I needed to help establish a work history and prove to society that individuals who'd made mistakes could in fact be restored as full citizens. So I started looking at different business ideas. Now, I have never been interested in business. I wanted to be a social worker when I was 13. And my mother was like, oh no, that's not gonna make any money in that. You need to get a business degree or something that's gonna make you money. And I'm like, really? And so I have always felt not quite a good fit with business until this situation happened. And so, and I did get an undergrad in business management, by the way, so I did listen to my mom. But what happened is we started thinking about ideas that people who had limited academic backgrounds could connect to. And I started thinking about, landscaping, but there are hundreds of landscaping businesses out there. What would be our competitive advantage? What would differentiate us from other landscaping businesses? And I thought about a delivery service, and then I thought, I just had a lot of really, really, really bad ideas. And so I'm starting to give up. I'm like, what am I going to do? Because at the same time, I was trying to think about diversifying our funding stream as a nonprofit organization. And so one of my board members at the time, she's a hug a tree, save a dog, kind of gal. So I wasn't. And she says, well, Brenda, have you ever thought about beekeeping? And I'm like, what? And she was like, yeah, beekeeping. And I thought, well, what does it take to be a beekeeper? And she says, well, I don't know. But I know some beekeepers, and so let's go talk to them. And so what I learned in my conversation with them resonated with me, which is they said, beekeeping is about storytelling. It's about passing on this profession through storytelling. And I thought, oh my gosh, maybe that will be the thing that no matter what your academic attainment is, you can connect with stories. And so I thought, okay, let's try beekeeping. And I really wish it was deeper than that for you. People ask me so much, so why beekeeping? And there's this pause, like I'm going to share something really deep. And I'm like, it was just, I don't know, it was frustration, and someone told me about beekeeping. But what happened is it became a beautiful, beautiful metaphor. Now, of course, when I started to tell folks about this idea, people were saying, you're going to do what? You're going to help ex-offenders as beekeepers? And, lots of naysayers. And I started to question that myself, actually. I was like, well, maybe this isn't a good idea. But I stuck with it. And because one friend of mine who I respect deeply said to me, she listened to why I wanted to do this. I tell you, girl power, right? It takes women to change the world for sure. And she said to me, Brenda, what a sweet beginning for these men and women. And I knew then, in my heart and in my spirit, that we were going to create sweet beginnings for people who needed them. And we were going to do it through honey. And after that, it was an incredible journey to learn about bees and to learn about how special they are. Let me quickly note that not only did we stay with honey, because we wanted this to be a sustainable business, we knew that we needed to expand our profit margins, because there's a little profit margin with honey, about 13%, maybe as high as 18%, and that's not a sustainable business. And with 2.3 million people coming out of our prisons annually, and with 40,000 men and women coming out of prison in Illinois annually, we wanted this to be a sustainable business. So we had to expand from selling our honey, which is called Bee Love, to including skincare products. I have a little sheet here for some really cool bee facts, and I'm not going to get it with them long. But basically, you should know that honeybees pollinate a third of our food supply. And so 3 bites of food, for every 3 bites of food we eat, isn't that kind of cool? They will travel 2 to 3 miles to collect nectar. They are amazing, wonderful little creatures, and it's all about the queen bee, which I kind of like. There's a story about this young lady named Yvonne, and Yvonne has an amazing story, but there's a story I really want to share with you about my first encounter hiring someone to work in Sweet Beginnings. So again, I had not worked with the formerly incarcerated population, nor had I worked with bees, but I do know workforce development. So I sat down to interview one of our first ever applicants. someone who had graduated from our U-Turn permitted program, and his name was Kelwin. And I said, as we sat down, well, Kelwin, tell me what kind of work experience you've had. And he said, well, Miss Barber, I've never had a job before. And I said, oh, well, and I never really ask about people's backgrounds, but at this point I just said, well, what kind of got you in trouble? And he said, well, ma'am, I was a drug dealer. I said, oh, where is this gonna go? And then I said, well, were you a good drug dealer? And he said, well, yes, ma'am, I was. And it was interesting to see him sort of sit up a little taller in his seat, and I'm like, oh, so, well, what makes you a good drug dealer? He goes, well, ma'am, it's very competitive out there on the block. I'm like, well, yeah, it is. And he says, so he has to compete with the other folks in their open air markets, selling drugs. And I thought, okay. And I said, well, what else? Tell me more, because this is interesting. And he says, well, I have to manage my inventory. I'm like, no way. And then, he has to be good with numbers because it's all about profit. And I said, Kelwin, don't ever say you don't have work experience, because you do. It wasn't legal, but you have tremendous amount of skill. And that was a moment for me, because I had come into that interview not thinking he had much to offer. But the reality is, we had to redirect and transform the skill sets that he had to legal work, to viable work that would sustain himself and his family. And that was an amazing first lesson for me. So that's just a shot of our quality products. And it's really important to me that our products look good, that they are the best they possibly can be, because I really do think it's important that folks who need second chances, that live with that label, can be associated with a first quality product. Do you see? Are you with me? It does something amazing when I see an individual who has helped to produce, a lotion, and they go to a Whole Foods store in Chicago, hopefully coming to you soon. But they'll go to a Whole Foods store and they will say to their son or daughter, and I've seen this, this is what Daddy made, And it touches me because there's such pride in that. And I realize that successful reentry and reintegration is really about building one's self-worth and knowing that you value, that you're of value. And so these products, are made with love and with folks who care because it is their second chance. So our sales, we're growing. I just wanted to give you a quick overview that our sales continue to grow year after year. Our average turnover rate on the shelf is about 80%. We've expanded last year into Hudson News, which is at the airports in O'Hare Airport and Midway, and I was so excited about that because people kept saying that this is going to be, isn't this a hobby? Isn't beekeeping a hobby? And I kept saying, no, it's a business. This is really a business. And so it excites me and brings me joy to know that we really are a business. We have hired to date 383 men and women who have turned their lives around. Yeah. So it's nice to tell the story, sort of very linear, process, but it was bumpy and sticky. And just as I discovered this morning when I was speaking with Mary and Kate, that, you know, I've always talked about the beautiful qualities of honey and how local honey is good for you, and it is, and just the ways in which we can incorporate honey into our lives. But I also have to recognize that honey can be sticky and really uncomfortable. And I think that that's part of the story that continues to evolve for me as I learn more about working with this population and working with bees. So I was asked to share a little bit about some of how I got here, and I really do see my journey as a leap of faith. And I think it's a huge opportunity to serve the individuals who are often invisible and who are feared by society. And what I find interesting about men and women who've been formerly incarcerated and bees, who would have thunk this, right? That people have fear of bees. And people have fear of people who have committed crimes. And should they? What do you say? Yeah, absolutely. They also can sting, right? We've been stung oftentimes by people who have committed crimes or by a honeybee. But what I've learned about the honeybee is that she's only interested really in sustaining herself and her hive and making honey, collecting pollen, and contributing to her larger community. And at the end of the day, I think that that's what the folks that we work with have in common as well. So each step of the way, I have operated on a real sense of faith, and I'm not going to go into all of those points that I've noted here, but I will share with you that it's amazing what you can do, even when other people don't think you can, or don't expect more out of you. When I lived in Denver, Colorado, I was working for an organization at the time called Up With People. Some of you may be familiar with the organization. I'm not going to sing for you or do the famous clap. But I was in charge of training and development and was really into experiential education. And so we went out to a ropes course, and we were all divided up into groups, and I climbed a 40-foot telephone pole. And then what you do once you're at the top of this pole is you're linked in and connected to your group below. Some of you have done this, I'm sure. I don't even know the terms anymore. But you literally leap off of that pole and you allow the group to support you. And I have always been a woman of substance, if you will. So it took me a minute. It took me a minute to get up that pole. But never in my mind did I ever think I wouldn't or couldn't. But little did I know that the folks that run this ropes course had determined that I would have difficulty. And they were standing around, and I didn't even know, I didn't pay attention. I wasn't even aware. And so I climbed, this is in Denver altitude, got up there, did my thing, and I leapt, and at the time you say something, that you can sort of hold on to, a mantra. And I said, I'm going to try to see the beauty in others, really seek to see the beauty in others. And then I jumped off, and I did it. And it wasn't until I landed that I realized that those folks did not think I could do it. And I find that interesting because you have to surround yourself with folk who believe in you. And there will always be naysayers. And I have learned to embrace them too. Because without my naysayers, I know I wouldn't be standing here today. When people said, well, how do you turn a seasonal business into a year-round business? I'm like, I need to respond to that. You know, how do you expand the profit margins? Well, I need to hear that. So I've learned to embrace what folks have to say, those naysayers. But I've also decided that I have to trust myself. I have to have confidence in myself, and then work to surround myself with people that will truly support me and be honest with me. I think it's important to stay focused on the big picture, and I always am asking myself, what did I do? How well did I do it? And is anybody better off? Those are the 3 tools by which I use to measure my effectiveness. The other thing I will close with is I'm so grateful for this journey. You know, I was just a very basic kid, a very average student. You know, college was difficult, but I managed. Raised by a single-parent mother who was very busy raising 4 girls, and she's very proud of us today. But never thought I was extraordinary until this challenge was put before me. And I think that if there's a way that we can remind our girls in particular about how extraordinary they are very early, so that they'll have confidence to not let others sway them and question who they are, because we have been gifted, each of us, with something really incredible, and it's an exciting journey to discover what that is. I could really relate to our previous speaker. I have a daughter who's 14. Yeah, the 14s. It is so hard. Her name is Maya, so I can relate to Mia's name as well. And so much of this is about her journey as well. And so I would just like to say, if you have an idea, if you're looking at launching into a business, I wish you the best, and I want you to have a very sweet beginning, if you will. Thank you.